Kal Kadosh, Boker Or, Masechet, Bava Metzia Daf, Yudchet, Amud Aleph. The Gemara is now saying as follows. We wanted to deduce from the Mishnah that there we said Goveh Takol, that he's Goveh Takol, that she's going to collect everything. Okay, which means that even if, right, we're talking about the husband himself wrote the ketubah, she still collects everything. Now, we said over there, if it's going to be that he wrote her a ketubah, that's what it means, govay takol. But if you're going to tell me that he didn't write her a ketubah, why is she going to collect everything? Manav matayim udidla. She only gets manav matayim. What does that mean? We know that a regular woman gets matayim if she's a betula, and a mana if she's not a betula. Meaning if she's a virgin, she gets 200, and if she's not a virgin, she gets 100. So not a virgin means whether it was that be'emet she was not a virgin, or the fact that whether it was that she was already widowed or divorced, v'chule v'chule. Okay? Fine. So says the Gemara, ve'ela, but rather, miditani de B'chia barami, that which B'chia barami came and he taught ishto arusa, lo onen v'lo metamela. What does that mean? If you're going to come and tell me that the chiyuv ketubah for an almana min arusin, right? How do we know that there's such a concept as the obligation of a ketubah for an almana from the irusin? Almana means, right, we know what an almana is, a widow, from the irusin, from the engagement, okay? And therefore, the question is, how do we know, is there such a thing as a chiyuv of a ketubah? So from the fact that Rabbi Barami came and he said, ishto arusa, a person's wife when she's an arusa, remember, arusa is the first stage of marriage. Lo onen velo mitamela, meaning if she dies, he does not become an onen, right? And also, he does not become tameh for her. Meaning if he's a kohen, right, he does not become a kohen only becomes tameh for his wife when it's his 100% wife, not when it's going to be an arusa. It's going to be number one. Also, right, he doesn't become an onen. So therefore, he could still eat all the kochim and right. Remember, aninut is the time frame in between, right, the death, right, and the actual burial. V'chen hi, same halacha applies to her. Yeah, shemet bala, that the husband, right, passes away, right. Also, lo onenet, right, she's not onenet, velo mitamela, right, she's not onenet, and also she doesn't become metameh to him, right. Meta, if right now she dies. Ena Yorsha, he does not, right, inherit her. Met who, if he dies, Gova Ktubata. So then she's going to be Gova the Ktubah. So Dilma says the Gemara, maybe the Katavla, he did write there a Ketubah. Right? So therefore it comes out that he actually did write her a Ketubah. And therefore, since he wrote a Ketubah, so then it makes sense. So says the Gemara, V'chitema de Katavla. Now if you're going to tell me now that Be'emet, he did write her a Ketubah, so then what does it mean now when you're going to say Meta and Yorsha? That if she dies, right, he's not going to inherit her. It's tzichaleh. Obviously, right, we needed it to teach us that even though they already did have such a concept that ki'ilu, that even he wrote her a ketubah, still, that's the chidush, that if she dies, right, in a yursha, he's not going to come and he's not going to inherit her. So it comes out that we cannot say that the Braita is talking about where the husband came and wrote mifurash ketubah, right, so we don't have a re'ayah that there's a ketubah for an almana min irusin. Meaning, until now, we're trying to find out ketubah. When does it start from? From irusin or nisuin? So we thought, we wanted to bring a proof that here we're talking about the ketubah already starts from the irusin, and we said that you can bring a proof from that. So says the Gemara, El Abaye gufam dematitin kadabe. But you're right. Abaye was trying to find out from the Mishnah in itself, right? Not from the almana from irusin, but from the Mishnah in itself. Now, why? Let's see the Mishnah. If you're going to tell me, bimkom she'en kotvin ketubah askin, and they were talking about a place where they don't write a ketubah, meaning there were certain places where they didn't have write a ketubah, but there was mitam bedin, there was a ketubah, so you didn't need to write it because it was already an obligation, and there was nothing. It's not like you have a decision. It was an obligation mitam bedin, therefore they didn't actually even write it. What?
Doing the Rusin?
Yes. So he says the ket hainu ketubata. Right, that we're talking about now that the get is the ketubah. So he says, Atu maneu matayim, right, ktivbe. If you're going to tell me now, maneu matayim, is that what's going to be written over here? Vechitei, if you're going to tell me, kevan tetakinu rabbanan migbala, right, keman dichtiv bedami. If you're going to tell me now that the rabbis instituted, and therefore it's as if that it's already paid up, so why can't he just say that I paid it up? Why can't he just say, I just paid it up? Yeah, he takes out a get, and I say, yeah, I paid up the ketubah. Now, if you're going to tell me, V'chiteima de'amnina le, they're going to say, okay, fine. Iparate, if you actually, did pay it up, why didn't you actually tear up the get? Amar lan, he says, lo shevaktan, they didn't let me tear up the get. Amra, because she said, ba'ina linsuvebe, I want to get married with the get. Meaning in the olden days, they actually used the get to get married. Okay, that was their marriage. Nowadays, yeah, they showed it. That was the proof. Nowadays, they don't get remarried with the get. They get remarried with a piece of paper from the bedin, which is a Masechet bedin showing that she got divorced. But in the olden days, she kept the get, and she actually used the get as a proof, that she's divorced. Exactly. So nowadays, it's a little bit different. But in the olden days, this is the way it was done. So he says. So therefore, he comes and he says, "Listen, you can't bring me a proof from the fact that I didn't tear up the get." He says she wanted to get married again. What am I going to do? Yeah. So he says, a receipt or something. So he says, "V'chitema." So if we're going to say, right, amnina lei, right, that we're going to come and say, right, ibaylach lemikre, which means you should have torn it up, umichtav agabe, and then right on the back, ali debetin, gita denan de karuna. This is the get. We tore it up not because it's a get pasul, but rather because we don't want to collect the money again. So atu kol de magbe bedina magbe. When you're going to collect a chov, you always collect it in bedin. Meaning, when was the last time you collected a chov and you went to a bedin and you collected a debt? That doesn't happen. So therefore, the fact that you want to come and you want to play this trick doesn't really work, because it doesn't happen. So because of that, that's why he says, right, in such a case, right, when a person could have come and said that he actually paid off the ketubah, right, and therefore you couldn't have done anything on the get, so therefore that's why he didn't want to tear it. So it comes out there's no mitziyut, right, that's what we're trying to say over here. There's no reality, right, that a get is going to be a proof that it wasn't paid off. So because of that, why in the world is a woman going to collect a ketubah through a get, right? So therefore he comes and he says, the reason is because you didn't do anything. You didn't do anything. Right, just like Rabbi Yochanan, what he said, and because of that, Abaye was actually retracted, and he actually agreed to Rabbi Yochanan. Right, that's what he's trying to actually say. Right, fine. Mishnah, okay, fine. Mishnah says as follows. Yeah, no. Matzah gite nashim. Right, if a person comes and he found a shtar, right, whether it's going to be a get of a woman, shichrure avadim, right, or a shtar shichrur, yeah, of an eved, or a daitiki. Daitiki is a shtar tzava'a, a will of a shchivmira, okay, of a person that's on his deathbed. Okay, so one more time, you have a get of a woman, emancipation letter, which is basically again of the avadim, a daitiki, which is going to be the will of a shchivmira, or matana, which is going to be a present for an adam bari, that he wrote a document for a matana, shovarin, which is going to be kabbalot. So these are the receipts that we're talking about. Hareze lo yachzid. You're not going to give back, right? The shtar, whether we're talking about not the one that was writing the shtar or the one that was written for. Meaning we don't give back to nobody, not to the husband and not to the wife, whether it's the emancipation letter, not to the slave and not to the master, right? Whether it's going to be a shtar matana, not the one that was giving the matana or the one that received the present, right? Whether it's not going to be meaning like all these things, you don't give back to anybody. Why? Shani omer, because I'm going to say, ketubina you, they were written, v'nimlach alehen shelo litenan. Yeah, and it was actually going to be decided not to give it. Meaning, many times it could happen, a person writes a document, he wants to give a present, and then at the end he just doesn't give the present. Or he wrote, write a get, and at the end he just, he calmed down, he didn't give the get to his wife. Or he wrote shtar shichrur, and at the end he didn't serve, right, he didn't give it to the, so because of all these things, we're not going to give back to anybody. Okay? What? Why would... So says the Gemara, ta'ama. The reason why we don't give the woman the get is dinimlach shelo litran, because maybe the husband actually didn't give it. Meaning, the husband wrote the get. He wanted to give it to the wife. But then he got home and all of a sudden she became mellowed a little bit. So since she mellowed, so he says, you know what, okay, he could withstand another little bit of time. But but if right now the husband came and he said to the one that found it, tenu, what happens if he says, give it to her? He says give it to her. So therefore, One second. So we are going to give it. Even if it's mashma, that even if there was a big, long time past, right, we're not going to suspect that maybe Bemet, it wasn't the one that it was written by somebody else, right? So it's mashma that you would actually give it to her. That means if he would actually come and say, give it to her, we would give it to her. But one second, how does it work? Says the Gemara, and this is I think what Jean Paul was trying to say, Urminu, we have a contradiction, Hamevi get, if a person comes and he brings a get, ve'avad hemenu, and it got lost, which means we're talking about a shaliach. The shliach comes and he brought a get, and then it got lost from him before he actually gave it over. Mitzao le'altar, only if he found it immediately, right? Which means mamash, a very, very small amount of time, right? So then it's going to be kosher, right? 1 second. So he says, right, that means basically it can't be that it was, went somewhere else or things like that, right? But he says, but if it's going to be after this time, that it wasn't l'altar, it wasn't that he found it immediately, it's going to be pasul. So now 1 second. So what's any different than bayas? Bayas, it could be that it was even in smashma a week later, a month later, I don't know what. And what? You're still going to give it? How could that work? How could that work that you're going to give this get? Because he says, give it. Well, give it.
It wasn't lost.
Yeah?
In one case, it's lost. Here, it's not lost.
So answers the Gemara, Rabba comes and he says, Lakashya, it's not a question, which means we just said that if right now we wanted to do from our Mishnah, that if the guy found it, right, and now the husband comes and he says, yeah, give it over, we give it over, right, that's what it's mashma. He says, 1 second, right, it's not that simple. Why? Because the case of the shaliach, that he's your shaliach, and he lost it for already a little bit of time, it's already pasul to give it over. So here in our Mishnah, it's a stira, because our Mishnah is mashma that even if it's going to be a long time, short, it doesn't say anything. Well, you're just going to say it's kasher to just give over the get to the wife? How could that be? So answers the Gemara, la kashya, it's not a question. Kan b'makom shashariyot mitzuyot, v'kan b'makom she'en hashayiriyot mitzuyot. Right? He comes and he says, here we're talking about where, right, there are groups of people that are able to travel, right? Which that means there's two different cases, right? So the Mishnah of the Gitin is talking about where it was lost in a place where there's people that are going back and forth, and therefore, if there was going to be Zman Merubeh, so therefore I'm going to suspect that maybe Bemet it's somebody else's get. Here in our Mishnah, we're talking about that there's not a lot of people coming back and forth, and therefore, since there's not Shayirot Mitzuyot, right? So therefore, if a person comes and he says, give it to the wife, we actually do give it to her. Right? And she's going to become divorced. So it all depends. Basically, the suspicion is, do we suspect that this get came from somewhere else or not? So if there's Shayrot Mitzuyot, maybe it came from somebody else. The names, they had the same names. Remember, there's no last names in a get. Right? So therefore, right, basically it's going to be Sarah bat or Rivka bat Rachel or I don't know what, and Avraham ben, you understand? So therefore, right, it's very simple to find, right, the same type of a get. Says the Gemara, "Vafilu b'makom shashayirot mitzuyot." Even if you're going to tell me now that the shayirot are going to be mitzuyot, right? He comes and he says, right, vehu, and therefore maybe be'emet, right? The Rabbi says that we're going to suspect, right, that it did come from other places. Vehu shechzeku shnei Yosef ben Shimon birachat, right? There's going to be two different people that are the same name, right, in the city, and therefore, right, since you have the same person that lives in the same, so you have two Yosef and Shimons, and also the names of the wife have to be the same, by the way. It's not only just the husband, but it's both of them, right? So therefore, in such a case, right, that's why we're going to have the problem. But he says, but if we're not going to, we're not going to suspect ourselves that that they have it, but that there are two people that have the exact same name, okay? Dilo temahachi, but if you're not going to say such a thing, that maybe be'emet, even if there's no chazaka of two different people with the same name, kashya derabba, you have a stira of Rabba on Rabba. Why? Listen to the case. There was a get that was found by the Betin of Rav Huna. It was written B'Shvire Mata Darachis Nahara, in the city of Shvire, right, which is basically found on Nahar Rachis. This is like the river. Remember that the Gitim and also Ketubot, right, it's the name of the city, right? The Gitin and the Ketubot and everything, they always have, right? They always have names, and the names of the city, right, always have like a destination, meaning that it always has where's it found. So if it's by a river, exactly, like some type of
like by the big tree.
Exactly. So okay, we don't go by trees. Usually we'll go by rivers, by wells, by the sea, by
Sometimes
mountains,
there's
not
an
usually.
old 500-year olive tree, they might want to say.
Okay, but usually the main ones that we
Yeah,
always go by
yeah.
is all these things. Okay, so here it says ve'amar Ravuna. So said Ravuna. Now what happened was the shliach came, and he said that he lost it. Yeah. Now they wanted that he should give it to him in order to get divorce the guy's wife. Ve'amar Ravuna comes and he says Yudchet Amubet 18b Chayshina lishne shvide. We are going to suspect to two different cities, right, that are called shvide. Okay, so therefore you're going to have two different people with the same name. V'amale Rav Chasda l'Rabba, so says Rav Chasda to Rabba, Pok vayemba, go look into this halacha. Teleurta ba'u minach Ravuna, right? Because in the nighttime they're going to ask Ravuna. So nafak, so he went out, dak v'ashkach, and he found the raya. The Trump, as we said in a Mishnah, Kol maaseh bedin, any type of maaseh bedin that they found. Remember, maaseh bedin means that you have like the verification letter of a bedin that they came and they signed the document. Hareze yachzid, you can't give it back, right? Why? Because since it's going to be verified, so therefore it's for sure that it fell down, right, and not from the borrower but from the lender. Okay, because again, obviously it was only the lender which comes and he gets the document verified in order to make sure that everything's going okay. Okay, so we're not going to suspect that maybe Be'emet he, wrote it or whatever it is, and then it wasn't given over. Okay, so therefore, what happens is that it comes out that also in a get, right, that was found, we're not going to suspect that maybe there's another city, right, and that maybe Be'emet there's other people that have the exact same names. So therefore, if the get was mikuyam, which means it was verified, we're not going to suspect it's something else. So says the Gemara, Veha Bedina de Ravuna. Now, this city, this Bedina of Ravuna, was like a place which is Makom Sheirot Mitzuyot Dami. It's a place where there's always people that are coming there. Vekapashit Rabba Diachzid. Now, Rabba Paskind, that you actually do give it back. Right? Now, we're not going to suspect that there's somebody else. So, therefore, it's a stira from on Rabba to Rabba. Because if you're going to tell me right now that here you're saying that you give it back, in another place you're saying you don't give it back. So, what's going on then? It comes out. So, Almas, you see from here, if there's going to be a chazakah, that there's going to be two people by the name of Yosef ben Shimon in one city, so therefore we are going to suspect for that. But if not, and therefore we don't return it, right? But if not, so we're not going to suspect for that, which means that as long as we don't have a chazakah, that you have two people with the same names of the men and the women, we're not going to come, we're not going to suspect for that. Okay?
So town is not chazakah. Pure chazakah.
Says the Gemara, Avad Rabba Uvda. Right, so Rabba came and he did an action. What do we mean an uvda? He did halakha l'maaseh, and we're talking about that there was a get that was found, right? Bekitana, right? This was found in Beta Pishtan, okay? The Pumpadita, Kishmate, right? Just like the Braita, which means that we're not going to suspect to two different people, right? With these, with the names that basically we're talking about were Shairot Mitzuyot, or we're talking about that you have in the same city also two different people with those names, and therefore, since in those you don't have those two Tanaim names, you need two different conditions. You need that there's the Shairot Mitzuyot and there's a Chazakah of two different people with the same name. Okay, so that's what he did. Okay, so what happened is that Ika de Amri, some people say Hechal de Mizabne Kitana, right? Vehu shelo uchzeku. That really, be'emet, this Bekitana was a place where they were selling the pishtan. Okay, because beforehand we were talking about in a place of Bepishtan, which was Pumpadita, and here we're saying in a place where they actually come, right? What is Bekitana? Is it Pumpadita or just at a place where they're selling, right, the flax? And
the flax was soaked.
Yes.
Soak it. So nobody goes. There's no caravans there. There's
yes. Vehu shelo uchzeku. And now here, right? It says over here. By the way, you're in the next one, Richard, about soaking. We're not in soaking. We're still in the one selling.
Okay.
So the one before, right? So he says over here, Hechal de mizabne kitana, that we're talking about. We're selling the kitna. And again, we're not talking about pumpadita. Vehu, and this is talking about shelo uchzeku. Right, that there was no chazakah of two Yosef ben Shimons in the city. Ve'af al gav de shchichan, right, she'erata. Even though there are shiurot which are going to be found there, which means there are a lot of people because they come obviously to buy the flax. But since there's no chazakah that you have two people with the same names, so we're not going to suspect maybe they're from them, and therefore we're not going to suspect, right, that there's another city also with the same thing in front of us. Another shita, v'ikadamne, other people say, Hecha de taru kitana. This is not that they sold the flax, but rather where they soaked the flax. Okay, and therefore when they soaked the flax, there's not a lot of people there. Meaning, a lot of people were there to buy not to soak it, because the soaking is a process beforehand just to bring it out. So it says, now even though you're going to tell me that there is a chazakah, that two people have the same names, right, whether it's them and their wives. Because remember, whenever we're talking about two people with the same names, it's not just enough two people with the same names. It has to be their names and their wives' name have to be the same. And there's no talking about, there's not common shayrot, and therefore we're not going to suspect that the get was from somebody else. So these are, again, just different versions, right, of what we were bringing to do with the concept of the psak halacha. Okay? Now we're going to come and we're going to ask a question and answer up on what we spoke about beforehand. Rabbi Zera, Rami Matzniti in a Braita. Rabbi Zera came and he asked a contradiction between the Mishnah and the Braita. Umeshani, and he actually answered like this. Right? So listen to what exactly was the contradiction. Tanam, we learned in the Mishnah. Okay? If a husband comes and he sends a get, a mevi get, right? So imagine, you have a person that he's bringing the get. So he's a shaliach of the husband to bring a get. Vava de menu, and it gets lost from him. Mitzah ole altar, if he finds it immediately, so therefore it's going to be kasher. So he could actually use this get in order to come and divorce the guy's wife. V'im lavna, if he didn't find it immediately, pasul, he's going to be pasul to actually divorce the guy's wife. Why? Because we're going to suspect that maybe this is another get. It's not the same get. So we have a contradiction. Matzah get, isha bashuk, right? There's a tosefta. The tosefta says, what happens if a person comes and he finds a get isha in the marketplace? So he says, Bizman Shabal Mudeh, if the husband admits that it came from him, right? That means he basically, that he divorced her and it fell from her.
So meaning he has it already.
Yes. Yachzil Laisha, so you give it to the woman. Meaning it all depends on the husband. Does he admit? Yeah? En Habal Mudeh, if you're going to tell me that the husband does not admit to it, Lo Yachzil, you don't give it back. Lo Lazeh, Velo Lazeh. Not to the husband, and not to the woman. Right? Now, the woman you don't give it back, because maybe he didn't actually give it to her. Yeah, and if you're going to give it to her, so then what? She's going to get married and she wasn't divorced? So obviously not. But also you don't give it back to the husband. Why? Because maybe he did divorce her. Now, if you're going to give it to the husband, he could actually come and say that he paid off the ketubah, right? And therefore, she gave him back the get, kilu. Right? You remember, because remember, the get was still always kayam. So he got back the get because he paid off the ketubah. So ktani miyat, however that we learned, Bizman Shabal Modeh, that if the husband is going to be Modeh, Yachzil Laisha, you did give it back to the woman. It's mashma, even if it's going to be because we didn't come and put a time, meaning we didn't put a time frame when the guy found it. We just said, if the husband admits, you give it to her, right? And that's it. So what's going on? That's a stira. Okay? So answers Rabbi Zera, Umeshani we answer, Kan b'makom sha'ashiyot mitzuyot, the Mishnah of Gitin was talking about that it was lost in a place where there's a lot of people. So therefore, since there's a lot of people, if he found it immediately, yes. But if he didn't find it immediately, I'm going to suspect that the get was from someone else. But the Braita was talking about where there's not a lot of people coming. So therefore, if he comes and he says, give it, this is the same get. We're not going to start suspecting really be'emet that it's a new get or that some came from somewhere else. There's not a lot of people can come by. Ika damni, there are those that say, Vehu sheuchseku de lo nedar, right? There's a chazakah of two people that are called Yosef ben Shimon, that we're not going to give the get back to the woman, right? Unless there's going to be two different tanaim. That means basically we said that it had to be makom of shayro mitzuyot bo, and also a chazakah of two Yosef ben Shimons in the city. Then I'm going to come and say that maybe it came from somebody else. Which is like the answer of Rabba. So the first answer was just on its own, shayro mitzuyot, not shayro mitzuyot. Is there caravans coming or not caravans coming? That's it. Second answer was you needed two things. You needed caravans coming plus two different Yosef ben Shimons in the same city. Remember, whenever I say Yosef ben Shimon, it means also the wife as well. Okay, remember that always. Ika de Amri, another answer, right? Afal gav de lo uchseku, even be'emet, if there's no chazakah that there's two Yosef ben Shimons in the city, lo nedar, you don't give it back, and what? Plige de Rabba, and this argues on Rabba. Now, obviously, that means according to this, that this argues on Rabba. They hold that even if there's no chazakah of two Yosef ben Shimons, we're not going to suspect to another get. Okay? Now the Gemara is going to say this. So Bishma Rabba lo amar Rabbi Zera. I understand Rabba does not say like Rabbi Zera, matniti nalima le lakshuye, but it's better to ask a contradiction between one Mishnah and another one, right? Which is a very, very strong, it's a very strong question, right? which is the Yikar Lalacha, and therefore, it's contradicting. But according to Rabbi Zera, that he's asking from the Mishnah to the Braita, he says, why doesn't he say like Rabba? Why doesn't he ask just like Rabba from the Mishnah Gitin to our Mishnah? So Amar Lecha, so Rabbi Zera is going to answer you, Mikatani ha'amar tenu notnin, right? Va'afilu lizmam rubeh. He says, we never learned mefurash, right? That if you told her to give the get, that we do give it, and even if it's going to be a long time. We never learned that. Dilma amar, maybe he said tenu notnim. Maybe if he did say tenu, we do give it. Uleolam kedekaiman laltar, but really be'emet, it has to be laltar. That means you found it immediately. But if be'emet it was found after a long time, be'emet it's going to be pasul. So therefore, basically, Rabbi Zera was saying, you assumed that it was talking about after a long time. Whoever told you that? Maybe be'emet after a long time, you're right. We do not do that. But here we're talking about it was done immediately. So if it was done immediately, that's it. So Rabba comes and Rabba holds, Rabba Savar, Diktani, as we learned, Kol Maaseh Bedin. I skipped out. Lemanda Amar, according to the Mandamar, according to Rabbi Zera, Bimkom Shayashirot Mitzuyot, that we're talking about now, that there's going to be a lot of caravans. Ve'afar gav shelo uchseku shnei Yosef ben Shimon. And even though we do not have a chazakah that there's going to be two different Yosef ben Shimons, and this argues on Rabba, right? Because Rabba said that we're not going to suspect to another get, only in a case where you also have a chazakah of two Yosef ben Shimons, that we said before, because you needed two things. So b'may kami palgeden. So what is the mekor of the mechloket then? So Rabba savar diktani kol maaseh bedin arezi yachzir di ishtakach vevedin askinan. When according to Shitat Rabba he comes and he says that any maaseh bedin you're going to come and you're going to give it back, he says we're talking about where it was found in a bedin.
To a court.
Right?
You bring it to the court?
Exactly. Right? But what are we talking about? The talking about is that it was also found in a place of a bedin. Okay, now that's what he says over here. Okay, that means it was found in a moshav bedin, which is basically, that's where there's a lot of these types of documents, right? Ubetin kemakom shashriyo mitzuyot. Now the betin automatically is a place where people are always coming back and forth, right? Because that's what we always know. We always know that there's always people that are coming to bedin. People need to come to a bedin, so they come to the bedin all the time. Vehu shuchseku. Now it's dafka if it's going to be that there's going to be two different people, Yosef ben Shimon in the city, so then lo yachzir, but lo uchseku, right? If it is no chazakah that there's two people that are in the same name. Yachzir, you do give it back. Okay? But again, according to Rabba, you needed two conditions. You needed shayirot mitzuyot. So here, even though there's no shayirot mitzuyot, but there's a bedin. And the fact that there's a bedin is like that there's a lot of caravans going back and forth. Plus, number two, there was already a chazakah. So if there's a chazakah that there's two Yosef ben Shimons, so then obviously you're not going to give it back. But if there's no chazakah that there's two Yosef ben Shimons in the city, then you do give it back. But
I don't know what status there. Why would you give it back even though it's
Rabbi Zera, and according to Rabbi Zera, Malachi is going to tell you, Mi Ketani, did we actually learn? Kol maaseh bedin shenimtzu bevedin, kol maaseh bedin yachzir Ketani. We didn't say any maaseh bedin which was found in a bedin, in place of a bedin. We just said kol maaseh bedin yachzir, you give it back. Uleolam di ishtaka chabrai. So we're talking about that it was found outside of the moshav bedin. So therefore, it's not where the shayrot mitzuyot, meaning shayrot or mitzuyot, the caravans are going to be found only where the bedin is. But if it's found outside of that area of the bedin, there's not a lot of people coming back and forth there, right? So therefore, he comes and he says, in such a case, we shouldn't give it back, right? Even in a case where there's no chazakah of Shtei Yosef ben Shimon, right? We shouldn't give it back, because remember, according to him, even one condition was enough, which means shirot mitzuyot was already enough, according to him, that you're not going to give it back, because I'm going to suspect that it's another guy, right? That means this guy came and he found the guy. Maybe it comes from somebody else, bichlal, right? So Rabbi Yirmiyah comes and he says, כגון דקאם לידי, מעולם לא חתמנו אלא על גט אחד של יוסף בן שמעון. You know what happened? Very, very simple. Every single get has a edim. Now, what happens is, you have these two edim. Let's say the edim was Yitzchak ben Avraham and okay, you can't say Yaakov ben Yitzchak, Yitzchak ben Avraham and Reuven bar Shimon. Yeah, two different names. Now, we come and we find these two witnesses. And we want to find out what do we do this get. Now they come and they tell us, by the way, we only signed on one get, which the husband was Yosef ben Shimon. Now, if you already know that there's two witnesses, and these are the two witnesses which are signed on the document, and they're only saying that they only testified on one document, on one get, which was signed Yosef ben Shimon, so I'm not going to suspect that it came from somebody else. So therefore, obviously, we're going to give it back. Why are we going to give it back? Because at the end of the day, listen, we're not going to suspect that it came from somewhere else.
Yeah, that's a game changer.
Yes. So the Gemara is going to ask, if so, Maile Memra. So then what's a chidush? Obviously. So says the Gemara, I would have thought to say, Lechush dilma itra meshema kishma, ve'edim ke'edim. He says, fine. But why don't we just say that still there's going to be another get? Right? And it actually happened that the shemot of the Baal and the woman were shavim, and the edim were like the same edim as well. Meaning, not only are you going to have Yosef ben Shimon and Frecha Batzara, you understand? Also the edim. That the edim, what did I tell you the names were? I forgot the names.
Unlikely.
Whatever it was, whatever it is. So I would have thought to say also I'm going to suspect that the edim were also the same names, right? Now you're right. These edim that were by us, that you said okay, we only signed on one, but there was another two edim. Right?
Same names.
Same names.
Yeah.
And they signed on the same type of a document because it was the same name of the husband and the woman. And they also signed on Yosef ben Shimon and I don't know what. Yeah, Frecha bat I don't know what. So, Kamash Malan, we don't suspect for that. That far we don't suspect. Okay, that's why he had to actually give us, right, the 1 minute. So he says, Ravashi comes and he says, right, Kegon, for example, the Ka'amar, that he comes and he says, this is going to be another answer on the stira, that he comes and he says, Nekev yeshbo betzad ot plonit. Do you know that even until today they do this, by the way? They make a little sign that this sign identifies the get. So, for example, many times they do this when they're sending it overseas. So they're going to come and they're going to say, okay, fine. The third line starts with the letter Lamed. And the seventh line starts with a thing. And the 10th line ends with a letter
Have you
this.
seen this with
And
your own eyes?
yes, I've seen this with my own eyes. Yeah, all the time.
And
Yeah,
also spacing.
yeah, exactly. We saw it here.
Also odd space, purposely
Right.
to do odd space a little bit.
No, you're not allowed to make a space. Spacing,
no?
no.
No space?
You're not allowed to make a space. Space makes it pasul. Right? But we're talking about that how does it start, finish, plus bigger letters. So I'm going to say, okay, so I had a bigger letter in this line. This, and a little pinhole. Yes. Many times they'll come and they'll say there's going to be a little pinhole on the top of the letter top on the first line. You understand? So because they actually come and they have, right, all these different simanim, so therefore that's why they were, how do you call this? They were verifying the get through this siman. Okay? And therefore that's what he's coming and saying. It's called a siman muvhak. And therefore we know that this is actually the get that they actually found. V'davka betzad ot plonit. Said, but it has to be by a letter, a certain letter. Aval nekev b'alma, which just stam. It was a hole. It doesn't help. Rav Ashi misavkale. Rav Ashi actually was mistapek of simanim, right, which are not muvakim, is a doraita or dorabanan. Which means, do we say that midin Torah, you could be somech on these simanim, right, even on, on Isurei Torah and give it back, basically. Or it's only that it's a takana chachamim, right? That means that's why they said that no, that we don't want, hefker bedin hefker, things like that, but not on dinim doraita, right? But obviously that means basically, if it's going to be a siman muvhak, so siman muvhak means a pinhole on the letter tav, and where it is in the letter tav, meaning the letter tav in this word in this line. You know something that you know exactly where to look. That means it's not like you have to start. Yeah, I found it. No. You know exactly. First line, this word tav, boom. Yeah, not in the tav. Remember, it has to be by. Because if you make it in the tav, you can make a pasul. We're talking about by the letter tav.
That's
you have
why
little
if you
pinhole.
find something, you say, look, if somebody lost something, come call me.
Exactly.
You don't tell me you found a watch.
Exactly.
You
You
don't tell me
tell
you found a
her-
Rolex watch.
No, you could say a watch. You could just then he has to guess what it is. Huh?
The space in the letter is okay, no?
It could also be problematic. That's why they do it usually above. Yeah. So therefore, he comes and he says, right? Depends which letter. So that's why he says, no, that's what I'm saying. It could be problematic because you need mukaf gvilim, but that's why they do it on top. Yeah. So he comes and he says now that there's a question whether if it's going to be the doraita or the rabbanan only, and therefore that's how they were going to actually finish off with this, and then there's going to be a story, obviously, with the entire concept of giving back the get through simanim.